In this video, we will go over the big ideas of Chapter 6. The very first thing we did in this unit was to go from standard form to vertex form. Okay, and essentially what you want to do is find the vertex from standard form. We did this one of two ways, the very first one being completing the square. Now, if you want to be able to complete the square, then you need to know what a perfect square trinomial is. Now, after we completed the square, we said that it was a great technique, it works, but it's a little long. And luckily, we saw that there was a shortcut. And this shortcut says that the x-coordinate of the vertex is always negative b over 2a. But really, the shortcut comes from your ability to complete the square. And your ability to complete the square comes from Chapter 5 when you learn about a perfect square trinomial. So really can't advance to Chapter 6 without some knowledge from Chapter 5. So with your ability to find the vertex from standard form, we did these maximum word problems. Because the vertex is such a powerful point, it can really answer quite a few different important word problems. The third thing we did was solve quadratic equations. Okay, so I'm going a little out of order in terms of the way I presented the videos, but I want to group the ideas together. So the second big focus of this unit is solving quadratic equations. Okay, so the first thing is finding the vertex. And the second thing is solving quadratic equations. Those are the two big ideas of this unit. You have to be able to do those two things. So solving quadratic equations, there are three different strategies. Now we mostly focused on two of the strategies, but I don't want you to neglect the third one. So you can solve, of course, by factoring. Now if it's not factorable, then you use the quadratic formula. Now if you forget the quadratic formula, then you can solve by completing the square. So what you have to do when you solve by completing the square, you complete the square, and then by doing so, you're enabled to rearrange and perform inverse operations to isolate for x and solve the quadratic equation. Okay, so the go-to method is always factoring. Okay, because it's the fastest. Factor, apply the zero product property, and then it's basically that's gonna give you the solution. Quadratic formula, it's not that long, but just writing the formula itself is tedious. So if you can avoid it, definitely avoid it. Now, of course, if you forget the quadratic formula and it's not factorable, then this is your last option. You have to be able to solve by completing the square. Anyways, this is very important skill when it comes to this chapter, because lots of the word problems that you deal with later on involve you to solve a quadratic equation. Now it doesn't matter which method you use, as long as you solve the quadratic equation. And really to approach these word problems, it's really build the equation and solve it. There's two big steps involved with these questions. Build the equation and solve the equation. Sometimes you use a quadratic formula, sometimes you don't. Okay, so always try to factor first. And then one small little detail is the discriminant. We talked about what's under the square root in the quadratic formula, which is b squared minus 4ac, and that's the discriminant. If the discriminant is positive, it tells you something. If it's negative, it tells something. If it's zero, it tells you something. So by studying the discriminant, you know the nature of the roots to your quadratic equation. So you're always going to get two roots. But if it's negative, you can get two complex roots, which we don't really discuss much about. All you really want to understand is that you don't have real numbers that will be able to solve your equation. So if it's negative, you get two complex roots. If it's positive, you get two unique real roots. So two real roots which are different from each other. So like, I don't know, like 1 and 6 are the solutions to your equation. Now, if you have a discriminant of 0, then you have two real roots, but they are identical. So it seems like you have one, but you really do have two. Anyways, those are the big ideas of Chapter 6, and I really want to emphasize, we could not learn Chapter 6 after Chapter 4. We had to take a little break in between and introduce some algebraic skills. you need to know what a perfect square trinomial is in order to complete the square. You need to be able to factor in order to solve a quadratic equation by factoring. So without those skills you learned from the previous chapter, this is going to be disastrous. Okay, so really refine those algebraic skills. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you can't expand and simplify and rearrange and set the quadratic equation equal to 0, guess what? These word problems over here, when you're trying to build the equation and solve it, that will also be disastrous. Okay, so really master the skills you learned in the previous chapter. Whether it's expanding and simplifying or factoring, you really want to master those skills. They will be tremendously beneficial for this chapter.